feminine characteristics. Now, they also were excessively. I want to make mention of a slave girl, child woman over time, of course, called Mary Prince. You may have heard her story. She was a Birmingham slave, and she was sold when she was around 12 years of age from one master to the next, because her original master could not afford to keep her there. You know, it's commodity, it's property. So if you are in hard times, if there's a recession, and you need some money, you sell a slave or two. So she was sold, and she was not the only one that was sold. Her siblings were sold, and her mother had to take her and her siblings to the slave market. You know, you could imagine how that woman felt, watching her children being sold off and had no control over it. She tells her story. She tells how she had to work hard. She had to wash, bake, pick cotton and wool, wash floors, and take care of cattle and children. This was in Bermuda, which was not a sugar plantation era, it was domestic slavery. So just compare that to what may have happened in a sugar economy. She was told of having to milk 11 cows before sunrise on a given day, right? This was a young girl in her teen years. So there was excessive work, and that is just an example of the nature of the work that even young women had to do. They were physically and verbally abused. When they were unable to carry out the excessive work given the time required, they suffered physical abuse and verbal abuse. And when I was growing up, they say sticks and stones can break my bones, but words cannot. You ever heard that? But you know that is not true. The words somebody tell you can cut you and keep in your system for life, right? And so the words that they would tell these, especially younger slaves, would you know, affect how they thought of themselves. They were beaten for any and every offense, even when they were not guilty of anything. He said when instructions were given to men, male children as well as female children, they were just automatically given a blow. Every word followed by a box or so. So they were abused, beaten with rope, cat whip, cart whip, or cow skin. Mary Prince tells of the case of one slave called Hetty, who suffered excessive beating while she was pregnant because her mistress said she had not completed the task for the day. And so in the night, the master would beat her. She was pregnant, and she was tied to a tree and beaten. She ended up having the baby early, stillbirth. And even after she recovered, she was constantly beaten. So after time, women began to welcome death, according to Mary Prince, because they suffered so much. They were in constant pain. And they saw death as a good thing. These women endured blows to their faces, their heads. They were beaten naked. Just imagine a pregnant woman being stripped naked and beaten. And they couldn't do anything about it. Probably worse for the men looking on. So that would lead to resistance. The literature also suggests that women in the early years especially were the cause of rebellion, in the sense that in the few women who were present in the slave society made it difficult for men to find wives. Right? So if on your plantation there were not enough women, men would resist. They would go off to find women on other plantations. And if they couldn't find women, they would refuse to work. They were accustomed to having wives, and they come from polygamous society. So just imagine you can't find one, and you're accustomed to many. So they would rebel. So they not only were women rebelling, but their absence could lead to rebellion on the part of the men, shortage of women. So that is one of the reasons why the policy of the planters to introduce fewer women had to change, because they had to get enough women to satisfy the needs of the men for wives. Those are just some of the reasons why women would resist, and men too: excessive work, physical and verbal abuse would cause them to resist. How did they resist? I'm sure from your studies so far you have heard things like passive rebellion and active rebellion. Well, don't use those again. Historians have rejected. That's an old way of looking at classifying the information. The view is that you can't be passive if you are taking action. Right? It's not a passive thing. Right? You will find more recently historians using violent against non-violent, probably a better form of classification. I'm not going to use those. They are accustomed to them. I'm just going to give you some specific ways in which they resisted. When I reread, to prepare this, I reread the story of Mary Prince as a kind of tangible example of a woman who experienced slavery and told her story. When she was an adult, suffering from rheumatism and so on, and she was telling the story while she was in England in the 1830s. So it was part of the kind of emancipation campaign. Some people feel that because of that she may have exaggerated certain things. But there are two things that came out in her story that I want to use as examples of forms of resistance, sometimes we probably would not necessarily highlight. One of them was religion. Religion as a form of resistance. This was a quiet way in a way in which both men and women resisted. They became part of the Christian community. Once non-conformist missionaries came with the desire to Christianize, we often see it as negative because we've seen that they're using Christianity for people not to see it or by their conditions. But in fact, if you look at it clearly, you will see that it became an instrument of resistance, right? Sam Sharp, for instance, who was a part of the church, and his exposure in the church helped him to develop the whole idea of freedom. Now this woman, Mary Prince, said that she was baptized very early in the Anglican church, called the English church, but she couldn't go to Sunday school to learn, because she'd have to get the permission of her master, and she knew that she wouldn't get it, so she didn't bother to ask. But she managed at one time to go to a meeting of non-conformists, not the state church, not the official church. It seemed as if it was Moravian, because she said she joined the Moravian church. And she became converted to Christianity, and she became a member. Now, why is it that I'm saying that this is a challenge to the system of slavery? If slaves were seen as commodities, they were not persons, then how are they becoming religious? It is a recognition that they are human beings. To use the Christian terminology, that they had souls to be saved, right? So that is saying you have a personality, you are a human being. And they accepted this. When they became Christian, they asserted that they had a master above the planter, who he had to submit to as well, right? It may have been used to get them to be quiet, not going to open rebellion, but the fact is they asserted their humanity by becoming Christian, and so diminished the master's control over them. Mary Prince said, this meeting had a great impression on me, the meeting she had gone to and where she was converted, and led my spirit to the Moravian church, so that when I got back to town, I went and prayed to have my name put down in the missionaries' book. I followed the church earnestly every opportunity. I did not tell my mistress about it, for I knew that she would not give me leave to go, but I felt I must go. Whenever